Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar titled Optimize Your Car Wash Business and Maximize Its Value, presented by Max Pulcini from Everwash and Harry Caruso from Car Wash Advisory. We're really excited to have this awesome conversation here for you guys in attendance. We're also recording, and we're going to be putting this up on our YouTube and on our podcast for anyone else who wants to listen to the conversation later on. But we'll go ahead and get started. Start with some intros. My name is Max Pulcini. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Everwash. I've been here for over 6 years now, with a variety of roles and hats. But right now, I am joined by Harry Caruso from the Car Wash Advisory. How you doing, Harry?
Doing very well. Excited to be here, Max.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Why don't you let our audience know a little bit about you and what it is that Car Wash Advisory does and helps out within the industry?
Yeah, of course. So, Max, my background, and for everybody on, my background's mostly in traditional finance. So, primarily investment banking and hedge fund investing. Now, in terms of what we do, Car Wash Advisory is an investment bank and an M&A advisor for car washes and only car washes. So if an owner is looking to sell, to do a capital raise, or to do any sort of capital restructuring, that is our bread and butter and exactly and only what we do.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into this, Harry, but why does the type of car wash kind of matter when we're approaching questions and situations like this when it comes to M&A, acquisition, selling, etc.?
Yeah, Max, it's a really good point and good question. So it means a tremendous amount. And the primary reason is quite simplistic, but reigns true in the end, which is ultimately when you're going to explore selling your businesses, whether it's a single site or multi-site, the end all question is, well, who is the buyer? And that may be a company, it may be an investment group, it may be an individual. But the buyer profiles, as well as the appetite for different car wash models, as well as magnitude by way of site count, is extraordinarily different depending on model and size. So it does have quite a large implication.
Harry, just a couple questions. Why is the resale value of a car wash so important for operators to consider?
Yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, right, 99% of owners of any businesses, car washes being no exception, will eventually sell. And I assure you this, and I imagine this will be a common thread throughout our discussion here. The way to increase value, they're not quick fixes, right? So even if you're not looking to sell today, building and compounding that value, which will eventually transcend into exit value at some point, better to get started sooner than later, if you will. Again, there's no golden bullet per se. And then, Max, even for those that don't sell, so if you're going to keep your washes in your family, which is pretty much the coolest thing ever, right? If you're able to do that, even if you are, all the things that you would be maximizing for or optimizing for in the event of a proposed sale are all of the factors and characteristics that allow for you to have a business that persists and does so profitably and allows it to transcend through generations and survive and do very, very well. So even if you're not looking to sell, the factors that are optimized for selling are the same that you would look at to keep the business extraordinarily healthy.
Right. I mean, it's more of a playbook for success, right? Even if you don't want to exit right away and keep it in the family, it makes a ton of sense to me. And so, with that being said, what are some of those key factors that, potential buyers or investors look for when evaluating the resale value of a car wash business? Or, what are kind of the keys to success that any car wash operation should really focus in on?
So if I had to pick one answer, which I know you're not even asking me to do, but I'll give you a real answer right after this, but it's the team. It's the
Right.
manager and the employees. And I guarantee, right, there is no buyer group, investor group, or individual out there that does not put that first and foremost. And that may not immediately translate into offers because it's hard to quantify and to convey to somebody, but it most certainly does by way of end transactions. In terms of the larger question here as to what really impacts value, I think it's almost best to think about all of this, Max and everybody that's listening. I think it's best to think about this in terms of, at the end of the day, right? Everybody focuses so myopically and so strongly on what was your last 12 months, revenue or EBITDA or CAT, right? And membership numbers. And don't get me wrong, they're exceedingly, exceedingly important. But if you kind of pull back the curtain a little bit, at the end of the day, what they're buying is they're buying the future ability to earn and run this business. Right. And in doing so, right, yet the historicals absolutely set the precedent and the platform for doing so by way of financial feasibility, transactional feasibility, so on and so forth. But the other part of this entire equation is that's great that somebody can see that future and they can, go ahead and propel it to a different level. But are all the pieces in place for them to come in, step in, and actually achieve that future vision?
Right.
And that's the harder to quantify, but so very important part of it all.
Yeah, we're talking a little like existential things right here, right? It's not so much just like, do you have a machine? Do you have soap? Do you have chemicals? It's people, it's systems, right? We were talking earlier, systems are such an important aspect to this. And systems can manifest themselves in any number of ways, whether they're marketing systems, membership systems, operational systems, but just having things in place and not just having everything exist as, well, I have a checklist in my brain that I know I need to do every day when I get to work. That's the key, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to, and please, for goodness sakes, do not think I'm not saying historical financial performance is not important. For goodness sakes, it is. But all is well and good in terms of them having produced this much in gross sales. But to what avail is that if the new owner can't produce it themselves? Right. So the systems are extraordinarily important.
Yeah. So, again, like given your expertise, we wanted to hear from you some stories. We're going to start with the ugly. We're going to work backwards. And what I really want you to do here is share a story that, people can learn from, that'll help guide them down the path of what not to do when going down this route and trying to figure out what the business is valued at. So take it away, Harry.
Sure. So without naming, of course, any washes or anything, and let's call this purely theoretical with some sort of basis, if you will. There's one instance that I think is most emblematic of what can go wrong and be the binary factor of this should not have been done, period, right? Because it's one thing to decrease value. It's another thing to potentially get yourself into a situation of illiquidity. And this is an example of that. So there was an instance where we were representing a 4-site express exterior owner who a buyer ended up coming in from seemingly nowhere and almost seemed too good to be true, was fast and heavy, and ended up purchasing the washes. This owner lived multiple states away, had no experience in car washes, had done very little homework on the industry, and was purporting a 1031 rollover. Now, the ugly in this situation is what will ultimately be this buyer then going and reselling these. So what happened was the transaction closes, and quite quickly, as you can imagine, with the circumstances at hand, and soon enough, the performance just takes a nosedive. We have now an absentee owner who very, very quickly realizes that what they bought is something that was entirely purported and for which the foundation was the old owner. And everything started going south. Everything you can imagine. We're talking membership numbers, gross revenue, average ticket price, sites being down. And very quickly, this individual sort of realized over the course of maybe a month and a half, I should not have done this.
Wow, it went south that quick, huh?
Oh, yes, very fast, very fast. Because the thing is, and it sounds so very rudimentary, but somebody has to turn the lights on in the morning. So if that person doesn't come in, it's kind of hard to get the rest of the stuff moving along. So this individual came, we kept in contact with them, and we actually ended up selling it for them in a month and a half. Now, I will, in all truthfulness, this individual ended up, but it was entirely due to the markets at hand, ended up just fine by way of financial exit. Although had that situation occurred today, there would be a instance of illiquidity. There would be no buyer, quite frankly. And the reason is because at that point, the business was in such a tailspin, and he bought it on bear multiples at the time, right? Everything seemed fine. Profitability was fantastic. Everything was growing, comes in, nosedives, and tries to sell. And at that exact time, which was really the peak of the fervor in this industry, that individual was able to get out via selling to a strategic quite successfully. But, and again, today, there's no way that simply wouldn't have happened. And that person would be left with having to uproot their life to go do this, or a fire sale event.
Wow. So there's really two lessons to be learned here. One is, if you are looking to buy another car wash, you need to make sure that the people that made that car wash work are either still in place or offering you an SOP or a manual or some sort of guide to how to make it, continue to run as if nothing happened, right? But two is, if you're looking to sell, if you want to help set up that new person for success, you might want to offer some of these things as well. So it kind of goes both ways, right?
It definitely goes both ways. And I think, that situation is so polarizing because of the very short duration in which this owner owned it. I think when we get to our next tier, which is the bad, not the ugly, that threat of not having transferability by way of systems becomes even more true, but more demonstrable, because it's hard to convey how a tailspin on a 4-site package can happen, otherwise looking great, in a month and a half.
Yeah.
But I assure you it can.
Now, part of the reason why this was an example of the ugly, but maybe not, horror show level ugly, was the financial kind of situation at the time that this all went down. You mentioned, if this same deal were to happen today, that operator would not be in a good financial situation. I mean, obviously, we know, the economy is in, a weird place right now. Could you kind of go a little bit deeper to explain the reasons why, at a time like this, it's really important to have your ducks in a row?
Sure, but for fair warning, you're poking the bear here with a comment like this, or a question like this, Max. So this is something that I could go on for quite some time. So I think the truth of the matter is, and a lot of people dance around this issue, is where are valuations today as opposed to 2 years ago in this industry? And the answer is inarguably extraordinarily different. Period. Like, they are different than where they were. The magnitude of the change that we've seen, and talking about it from the most simplistic sort of cash flow multiple basis, or an EBITDA multiple basis, is more pronounced the larger you get by way of number of sites. So the mega deals, the large deals, are seeing a larger impact than, let's say, the single site, double site, triple site deals. Nonetheless, all of them are feeling the repercussions. And it's due to two things. One is people have become concerned due to whether or not you want to call it a red herring, or whether or not you want to call it representative factual evidence of what scaling in this industry could look like by way of public participants. Regardless, there has been more of a kimono sort of being taken off here, and more visibility in that regard, which is causing some sort of institutional investor concern and reticence. And then on the secondary side, and there's no avoiding this, interest rates are more than double what they used to be for certain loan types today. I mean, there's no way around that. And that does have a implication on valuations.
It's hard enough to buy a car or a home right now. Imagine buying a multi-million-dollar business and everything that comes along with it, right?
Max, I was on the phone with, so I'm on the phone with a single site owner maybe 2 days ago. And shame on me, but I was almost taken aback by this, despite dealing with this every day. I kind of sat with it for a second. We were talking, and we had a conversation about they have an SBA 7A loan on a single site. And they were talking about the interest rate, and they're paying an effective 13% interest. And I'm sitting there, and we have a whole conversation. I get off the phone, I was like, and it's not like we don't deal with this every day, but it's just so funny to think that, 18 months ago, that was 6%.
Right.
How times have changed, and that's a huge expense. So it's definitely having an impact.
Yeah. Oh, money can be pretty, but it oftentimes can lead to the ugly, right? I mean, it's a tough reality that we're faced with right now. But on that note, Harry, anything else you want to kind of mention with this side of the story?
Max, the only other thing that I'd kind of be remiss, given that we're talking about interest rates and the implications and all of it, is I think one thing's exceedingly important that nobody really ever verbalizes, and that is, yes, interest rates have a effect on cash flow, sure. But the truth of the matter is, and this is especially true for car washes as opposed to other industries with thinner margins, uh, if you are a fundamental business owner, right, your entire predication and thesis is I'm building a good business that provides good services to good people, and we do a heck of a job at it. There is really no financing structure, interest rate increase, or anything of the sorts that will sink that ship.
Right.
So, although interest rates may have an implication on valuations and multiples and ability to pay and financing in terms of capital availability, fine. But in terms of, is this a cannonball that will sink an otherwise sturdy ship? No, absolutely not. Financial leverage will just make it more pronounced if maybe something shouldn't have been done in the first place.
Makes sense. Great. Cool. Well, thanks for going through the ugly, right? Now we'll move on to the bad. So we're kicking it down a notch. Things are still a little rocky, maybe not potentially disastrous as your last story, but what's an example of some of the more common pitfalls that people, kind of step into when going down this path, and how can we educate ourselves from some of those shortcomings?
Yeah, so this one, I maybe didn't do the best job with the ugly versus the bad, because oddly enough, although the situation and circumstances may be less severe in this one, it's not a tailspin. The effect was actually quite more pronounced by way of the end sale price. So
Okay.
for this example, I'll never, I mean, I still talk to this individual. He was the best two-site operator I had ever experienced. This individual had his sites dialed in. So 2 express exterior car washes within 1 MSA. And these things were doing, somewhere in the tune of 150,000 cars, believe it or not, without membership. Everything was a la carte, pay to use vacuums. I mean, but he produced such a good car that he just killed it. So on paper, we have an individual with highest in class margins, right? Growing top line consistently 5 to 10% every year for the last 10 years. You want to talk about a demonstrable track record. So time comes and circumstances prevail, and it's time to sell. So we were representing this individual, and you could not find washes on paper that were better than this. They just, at all the numbers, terrific. Absolutely. What ended up happening was this individual transacted his washes for a multiple that is ostensibly lower than what you would expect on average for average washes of his caliber. And the reason this happened is because these washes do not run without him, and only him. And he did everything, and everything was custom tailored. Everything was perfectly dialed in for him. But there was no individual that could step into these washes, even with industry experience, and untangle what he had made to be perfect for him. It was wild, and it was one of the most, Max, this was such a, not aggravating, but almost in a way frustrating process, because this in one way, somebody looks at this and says, what do you mean he did too well? And the answer is no, he didn't do too well. What he did was he did very well in a way that didn't set anybody else up to do well.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you give some concrete examples? Like, was there any sort of a system that he used to run the business, or a visibility aspect that no one could figure out what they were doing once they saw, got under the hood, I guess is a good way to say it?
Yeah, there was a lot. Absolutely. So there was a lot of custom equipment that had been, and so fantastically impressive, right? I'm not, in no way, shape, or form does this deter from the accomplishment of building this, right? But everything was custom. And when I say everything, I mean everything. There was not a thing that came in from an OEM manufacturer that was not tweaked. So even just getting replacement parts became almost a mental exercise, if you will.
Right.
I think a really good example of how intertwined to this owner was with his washes was even washing between 2 sites over 320,000 cars. He was the person, his cell phone was the phone that rang when a customer called the company number.
Right. So now a new operation comes in, and his phone is still the only one attached to signage, maybe. And I mean, he's probably on a beach somewhere in Miami or the Keys, enjoying all that money. And now no one's picking up that phone. They didn't have a
Nobody's
system
picking
in
up.
place for a call center, for example, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, he did the equipment checks day in and day out. He turned the lights on and the lights off. That does not work when you come to selling. I mean, Max, just to be clear, not only does it have implication on the valuation, but a lot of times what we like to do is think about it in terms of there's a universe of, and we talked about this at the very beginning, a universe of applicable buyers, right? A buyer universe that have the ability to pay, the appetite for it, so on and so forth. The second the business becomes 1,000, like 100% predicated on that one individual, that buyer universe shrinks not by a factor of 2, but 10.
Right.
So it's huge, and it did rear its head by way of tangible impact in this example.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can kind of see how everything sounds good on the surface, but when it comes down to the exit strategy, this individual might have shot himself in the foot to a degree. It made it a little less of an attractive situation. Now, what do you think he could have done to make this a more attractive situation? And what are maybe some of the tangible steps he could have taken to graduate from bad into good or even great?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you asked this, because I was going to poke in and make sure that we got this point across. So I think this is a perfect example of how these aren't quick fixes. They're not, right? So how do we solve these issues? Yeah, okay, fine. Don't customize the equipment, but that's not the bigger issue. The bigger issue is nobody else at the two washes had the authorization to make purchases of equipment, replacement parts.
Okay.
Right. But I mean, okay. So how do you fix that problem? Well, you need to build a team that is now capable, has the autonomy to, and would you trust to do that sort of stuff. That is not something that you can go buy at a store, and it's not something that you can do overnight. That takes training, building a culture, right? This stuff takes tremendous amounts of time. So the biggest thing that this individual could have done was to alleviate themselves of responsibility and to empower others at his washes with that responsibility.
Right. Because, I mean, and maybe you can, I'll frame this as a question. How often, when an acquisition happens, how often does the human resources, the people power, save for the owner operator, how oftentimes do managers, attendants, chemical reps, all the other kind of people power that goes into an operation, how often does that come along with a business?
Well, it always comes along with the question, and Max, it's a really good question, is how often does it stay?
Right.
Right.
Better, right.
And it's a really good question. I don't mean to be facetious by way of wordplay, but yeah.
Oh.
So here's what's interesting. Everybody in this industry, and there are so many, simply put, just impressive growing companies in this industry right now, and each of them have their own strategies. And I think this is more akin to like a Coke Pepsi type thing and a preference than it is a right wrong. Believe it or not, I would say that it's close to a 50-50 split by the average acquirer in terms of clearing house versus keeping the team.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is, because you
I would
imagine,
imagine it'd be higher given kind of what we're talking about here.
so that's multi-site though, just to be fair. So now for individuals,
That makes
it's
sense.
almost never the case, other than keeping everybody on, because if it's been running well, to what avail is it to get rid of the people that made it run well?
The classic, if it ain't broke, why fix it, right?
100%, 100%. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, cool. Well, that's you kind of were a little nervous about the differentiation between ugly and bad. I think there's some clear differentiation here, and the story is clear for sure. You need to make sure that you're not the only person who can run a site. You need to make sure you have the right people empowered to do their jobs, so that way when that transition happens, it's smooth for everybody involved, including the people that you did leave behind, right? You don't want to set them up for failure, not just the new owner operator, but the people that you spent time and energy investing in, right? Training, working with. So makes sense to me, Harry. Was there anything else you wanted to kind of say in closing with the bad?
I don't think so. I don't think anything in particular.
Great. So, we're going to change our tune a little bit here and start to talk about the good and you know, the rock stars of the industry who have it all set. So, you know, tell us a story, Harry, and then you know, kind of go into the key factors that these folks did that other folks might be missing pretty easily that can help graduate you from a bad situation to a good or a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this is the more fun side of it, I suppose, right? So, and just to be clear, before getting into the specific story, this reigns true for any size, single site, all the way up to, and especially for the huge mega transactions, right? These sort of nonsensical, crazy multiples that people hear about for these huge transactions, they're almost always, if not but one other time, predicated on the operational purchase, not historical numbers only. So the example I have for this one is, it's actually 4 partners who owned a handful of car washes.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times with multiple partners and owners, it becomes inherently more complex, and there's more compounding risk and error potential in terms of, well, he said he was going to do that, so, and then nobody ends up doing that. These guys were the opposite. They were so impressive. They basically, what they did is they did the exact opposite of the last 2 examples. And what they did is they spent an inordinate amount of an almost arguably could be perceived as unnecessary amount of effort and energy to make it so that they were doing nothing by way of the day-to-day operations. And that took years. That was not a quick fix. But they did it, and they did it as partners. And when they went to go sell, what happened in that event, which was just so cool, is, believe it or not, these guys, it's called the masochists, if you will. They didn't enjoy the operational side, but they spent all this time to build up all these systems to make it so they didn't have to. What they really liked doing was site selection and development. So they go to sell. There's a tremendous amount of interest, multiple suitors. They end up getting a fantastic valuation and purchase price and deal. But in addition to that, because they had bundled up the core operating sites so succinctly and comprehensively, that they were also in that deal able to get a development deal for the acquirer so that they could keep doing what they actually enjoyed doing, not worrying about the operations.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
it was
like, talk about best case scenario, right?
and they deserve it. They did a lot of stuff they didn't like doing so that they wouldn't have to do it again. And they did it well.
That's the value of doing things the right way right from the start, right? And I say that it doesn't mean that if systems aren't in place, it's never too late to get systems in place, right? Especially when you have partners out there that can help you do that, right? I mean, you know, Everwash, for example, we help create the system for membership sales and subscription management. I would imagine membership is a huge factor when it comes to, you know, purchases, you know, acquisitions. So having a system in place for that and a centralized dashboard with, you know, real data that supports the membership program, I'd imagine that's paramount in a situation like this.
Absolutely. I cannot overstate the importance of membership. I can't. And additionally, I think one thing that can be overwhelming, Max, and especially in a conversation such as this, where we're talking about systems, because now you need somebody to, you know, systems for answering customer complaints, and you know, then you need the equipment, then you need the membership management. I think it's really important to highlight that it's to no detriment if the answer to a question regarding any of these sort of sub silos is, I'm not sure, let me ask that Everwash about the membership growth or attrition or anything, right? That is just as good as that owner owning it. So it's not to say that the owner has to be doing, you know, grow 10 extra arms and be doing everything themselves. Having those system partners are equally as valuable.
Right. And, you know, it owner operators, we know it, they know it, they are true experts when it comes to running a car wash. But there are so many other factors, like you just said, the customer support, the membership management, the maintenance, the mechanical stuff, right? Marketing and branding. There's so many different things that, while an owner operator is an expert at running their wash, they might not be a subject matter expert at all these other things that go into boosting the profile and the value of that operation, right? So just
Yeah.
lean on the experts around you. When you go to trade shows, when you're going to meetups and talking on Talk Car Wash on the Facebook pages, make sure you're learning from other people out there, because even though we have plenty of experts and great operators out there, you're only as good as what you don't know, right?
Absolutely, Max. And this is more me trying to convince myself or reiterate to me one of my sort of mantras, which is, done is better than perfect, right? So
Right.
it's okay that we don't have a perfect system to answer the phones, but somebody answering the phone as a service is better than no phone number, right? So,
Right.
so I know, and I struggle with this immensely on a personal basis. And thank goodness I have the team around me to help me with this. But it's sometimes hard to let go and feel overwhelmed with so many aspects. But I think having that in mind, that, a answering service is better than no phone number, no matter how that answering service is. Something's better than nothing, and it's easier than it may initially seem to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any other, things that really, and even more so than the good, the great, the fantastic, the total rock star? Like, is there any other tips, tricks, or, things that people should be aware of when, looking to sell and getting the most out of it?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm trying to well, yes, but one thing I'd be remiss to not mention, because we didn't mention it as an ancillary service or sub-silo, but please don't neglect it, is hiring. We have, in theory, run into certain situations where hiring practices have been so blasé that they actually come to inordinately create illiquidity by way of a sale event. If people are not hired correctly, you have to be doing normal background checks, so on and so forth,
Right.
especially at multi-site operations. In terms of the good, yeah, we've been so fortunate to experience and learn from so many owners that just had it dialed in. I mean, just remarkably impressive people, especially in automatic and self-serve owners that have been successful and truly running. And I use this very lightly and in a very, very specific context, absentee setups, right? Because they're not really absentee, right? And I don't want to say that in a way of telling people that's the way it works, but some people have set up operations where they have it so dialed in that there's not a towel dropped on the ground on their lot without them being aware, despite them being in Florida and the wash is being in Pennsylvania. And it's just extraordinary people, extraordinary operations.
Seriously, amazing, right? And that's the mentality. That's a winning mentality right there. That's a growth mentality right there. And I guess what I wanted to say in closing with the good is, again, just reiterating, these things that we're sharing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, isn't just for folks looking to sell today, tomorrow, in a month. For any of the folks out there listening who are happy running their business, these are still tools and techniques and tactics that you can employ, systems that you can create that will not only help your operation run smoother while you're still running it, but again, setting up your family for success. In 10, 15 years, if you do want to exit and retire to Miami or the Keys, wherever it may be, get this stuff in now, because if you don't think about it now and you start thinking about it, the day before you decide to put a for sale sign out on your lot, it's not going to be smooth, and you might fall into one of the first two categories that we discussed today as opposed to the last.
Yeah, Max, it hasn't happened to us yet, but I am dreading the day I get a call from, and knock on wood, heavens forbid, right, an owner whose spouse is less involved, calling us and saying, unfortunately, my spouse has passed. What do I do with this car wash?
Right.
That's not a wonderful position to be in, right? And nobody would wish that upon their loved ones. So I think you're right. In terms of thinking about these factors, they are just as equally as valuable for a heir or a spouse as it is a buyer.
We have a few questions that came in, Harry. You have some time to maybe take
absolutely.
a look? So the first question coming in from Sal, and I know we haven't talked too much about self-serve car washes today, but the question is, what is the average multiplier used for self-serve car washes?
Yeah, absolutely. So Max, I think what this individual is asking is, what is the cash flow multiple in terms of what are they being valued at? So self-serves and in-bays are interesting right now, and especially with combos. So I'll do my best to not go off the rails here and give you a 2-hour spiel. But Sal, I believe
Yes.
the asker's name was. So when you have a self-serve, some self-serves are incredible and they should never be changed. Some in-bays are incredible and should never be changed, especially touchless as when applicable, right? But they are not mutually exclusive, or they're not cannibalistic with tunnels to the point where it's 100% overlap. Far, far, far from it. When you go to value, the short answer is, in terms of self-serves, you're looking at somewhere in between 4.5 to 7, which is the largest band you're going to find in terms of adjusted cash flow multiples. The reason is that a self-serve that does this is the wash model that is financially viable at the lowest revenue level, right? You're not going to keep a full express exterior running if you're doing $80,000 of revenue. But a self-serve that's unattended, that is financially viable with a very low revenue. So the band of operating feasibility and the sort of flavors and sizes that self-serves come in vary so much that it's going to have the largest valuation band. So that's the short answer. The long answer is, whenever valuing a self-serve, it's very important, and an in-bay, just to at least in the back of your mind, and we do this for all people who come to us for evaluation, is it's always worth at least painting the picture of what would a conversion scenario be if it so happens that the buyer out there in that buyer universe who would pay most is somebody who would actually do a conversion scenario.
Thanks for that question, Sal. This is from an anonymous attendee. What are factors to valuing a flex service wash before it opens? And there's a part 2 to the question. How have you approached leasing versus selling versus running a wash for 2 years before you get data?
Yeah, it's like this one is going to be really hard, whoever the anonymous asker is, to cover comprehensively, because these are really good questions, and it's a perennial one, which we're constantly asked, which is, okay, I'm about to open, or I'm halfway through building, or I'm 3 months post-opening. When is the right time to sell, right? How long do I have to operate it for? Where's that optimality? So I wish that there was a perfect answer that would apply in all circumstances. The truth of the matter is, you're going to have to take the step back and say, okay, what is the buyer universe for this? And it might be an individual, but that would allow you to determine where that sort of value attribution is in terms of how long you have to run it. Our general rule of thumb is you need to be running something that includes from startup of building to making like a significant price change. You need to have that in place for 9 months roughly in order to get full value attribution for it. That being said, there is sort of a parabolic situation here where in many instances you're better off, more akin to like pre-revenue companies in the venture capital space. You can actually get more by selling before you open the doors than you would a week after opening the doors, because you're inherently lowering that sort of potential ceiling. So there's a lot there. Whoever asked that, I'll spare everybody else from you ranting for 2 hours, but I would be happy to discuss further about.
2 more questions came in. Another one, this is from Brent. Is a group of washes, say 6 locations, worth more together or individually if they are self-serve and IBAs? If you know, what is the way to look at that?
Yeah, so there's one caveat, but by and large, the simple answer is yes, they are worth more together.
Okay.
The one caveat there is, if the pro forma use and current performance is so vastly different that one would be, or a handful or a subsect of these washes would be viewed as being almost entirely different business types. So if you have a package of 5 and 4 of them do $500,000 in revenue and one of them does 100, that might be a situation where it's not as simple as, yes, you should force this one other last one in. But by and large, valuations do benefit from multiple sites, including on the in-bay automatic and self-service side.
Got it. Great. And then last question that we have in right now is from Eric. What is the multiple range for a self-serve and IBA mixed site?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So there's different revenue bounds, but the short answer there is you're looking at 6 to 7 on average. And that's adjusted cash flow. So you can presume, if you're in the, depending on where your revenue range is, right, you can presume that would be somewhere in the tune of, let's call it sorry, I'm trying to do it on in my head right now, but call it 6 to 7 times on adjusted cash flow with a presumed 50 to 55% cash flow margin on total gross sales.
Got another question here from Rich, and I think this is a really good one. Do license plate scanners add more value versus RFID? Are you seeing Tesla charging at cleaning stations as a value add in this type of a situation?
The Tesla charger one, to work in from the rear here, is a fantastic question. And it's one I don't have an answer to because there's just not enough demonstrable data yet. But there's a larger conversation to be had about that. It's not enough to say one way or the other. So let's call it indeterminate as of today. It certainly does not harm value, but it is quite an investment. By way of the RFID versus the license plate verification. So the answer is, there is, by and large, no. However, to specific buyers, it will be worth more. So an example of this, and I think the best way to think about this is POS, right? So if you're running ICS versus DRB, strategic A versus strategic B, they will pay more for the one that they're on. The problem is you're all but solving for a unsolvable variable without knowing who is the buyer. So by and large, it's something that really can't be optimized for, but it may end up being something that you are the beneficiary of, assuming that it is a fitting suitor.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, with that being said, Harry, any last minute parting thoughts, any advice that you'd like to give to our audience out there?
Max, other than just thank you all for joining, and please never hesitate to reach out if we can be of help with anything, but also please don't be afraid to get valuations done or to talk about financial conversations. That stuff, it's easier to talk about than you think, and as long as you're talking to the right person, it's always and forever will be confidential. So thank you all so much for joining.
Well, and thank you for joining me. This is a lot of fun. Always a pleasure to talk shop with you, Harry, and looking forward to the next conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
And thanks to everyone else joining. Looking forward to speaking with you all again soon, whether it's through a screen or in person. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll all talk soon. Thank you.